Former Navy SEAL Marcus Reynolds thought the war was finally behind him. Standing at a quiet gas station in rural New Mexico after a fallen comrade's funeral, he wanted nothing more than to go home. Years of combat had taught him control, restraint, and when not to fight. But when a local police officer mistook calm for guilt and power for justice, a routine stop turned into public humiliation. In that moment, Marcus realized some battles don't end overseas. They wait at home. This is a story about dignity, justice, and the cost of silence in the face of discrimination. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching since today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Redwood Falls lay quiet beneath a pale New Mexico sky, the kind of late-afternoon calm that stretched endlessly over desert highways. The heat had softened but not retreated, clinging to the air with a dry, breathless patience. Wind pushed dust across the asphalt in slow, lazy spirals. Nothing moved fast out here. Nothing ever did. The Desert Star fuel station stood alone along Route 117, a low concrete building bleached by years of sun and neglect. 2 pumps worked. 1 didn't. The place smelled of gasoline, dust, and old coffee that had been reheated too many times. A black Audi A6 rolled in quietly, its engine cutting off with a soft, mechanical sigh. The man who stepped out of the driver's seat did not belong to Redwood Falls. Marcus Reynolds was 42 years old, tall at just over 6 feet, broad-shouldered but lean, the kind of build shaped by years of discipline rather than vanity. His skin was dark, deep brown, weathered not by age but by distance, by places far removed from this empty stretch of highway. His hair was cropped close, salt beginning to show at the temples. His face was calm, angular, with a strong jaw and eyes that carried the weight of careful observation. They were the eyes of a man trained to scan rooms, exits, and people without appearing to do so. He wore his Navy SEAL ceremonial uniform, pressed and immaculate. The dark fabric absorbed the light, the metals on his chest catching it briefly when he moved. The uniform fit him perfectly, not tight, not loose, tailored to a body that had spent decades earning the right to wear it. Marcus paused after stepping out of the car, letting the heat settle against him. For a moment, he closed his eyes. The funeral had ended 3 hours earlier. Arlington soil still clung to his shoes in his memory, another name added to a list that never seemed to stop growing. He walked to the pump with measured steps, sliding the nozzle into place. His hands were steady. They always were. Across the lot, a police cruiser idled. Inside it sat Officer Clay Whitman. Whitman was 34, white, broad through the chest but soft around the edges in a way that spoke more of authority than endurance. His uniform was clean but worn carelessly. Shirt untucked at the back, sleeves rolled unevenly. His face was round, flushed red from heat and irritation, with pale blue eyes that darted often but rarely settled. His jaw worked constantly, chewing gum with aggressive, nervous energy. Whitman had grown up in Redwood Falls, high school football hero, local boy, badge at 24. The uniform gave him something he had never quite earned on his own: control. He watched Marcus through the windshield. "Look at that," Whitman muttered. He leaned forward slightly, narrowing his eyes. Black Audi, military uniform, medals, in the middle of nowhere. Too clean, too confident, too out of place. Whitman's mind began doing what it always did, connecting dots that didn't belong together. Fake uniform, stolen valor, stolen car, out-of-state plates, an excuse. He shifted the cruiser into drive. Marcus heard the engine before he saw the car move. That subtle change in sound, the low growl of something approaching with intent, set off an instinct he had trusted for years. He turned slowly, keeping his body relaxed. The cruiser rolled up and stopped abruptly, blocking the Audi's rear bumper. The door flew open. Whitman stepped out with purpose, one hand already resting on his holster. "Hey! Step away from the vehicle!" he shouted. Marcus froze, not in fear but in calculation. He raised his hands slowly, palms open. "Yes, officer?" he said calmly. His voice was low, even, controlled. Whitman closed the distance quickly. "What's with the costume?" Whitman snapped. "Where'd you get the uniform?" "This is not a costume," Marcus replied. "I'm Commander Marcus Reynolds, United States Navy. I'm just refueling." Whitman scoffed. "Yeah, funny how that works. Middle of nowhere, fancy car, fancy clothes." He gestured sharply. "Hands higher." Marcus complied, lifting his hands a few inches more. "Sir," he said, "my identification is in my jacket. If you'd like, don't move." Whitman barked, suddenly drawing his weapon. The sound of the gun clearing the holster cut through the quiet like glass breaking. Inside the station, Lena Ortiz looked up sharply. Lena was 29, petite with olive skin and dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She wore jeans, a light jacket, and scuffed sneakers, comfortable clothes for long days chasing stories that rarely went anywhere. Her eyes were sharp, alert, trained to notice tension before it exploded. A local journalist for the Redwood Falls Herald, she had learned that trouble in small towns rarely announced itself politely. She stepped closer to the window. Outside, a young man near the far pump lifted his phone. Noah Bennett was 21, tall and thin with a narrow frame that made him look younger than his age. He wore a faded hoodie and backpack slung over one shoulder, stopping for gas on his way back to campus. An economics student, observant by habit, cautious by nature. His dark eyes flicked from the gun to Marcus's raised hands. Noah had seen Officer Whitman before. He'd heard the way Whitman spoke to people who looked like Marcus. The tone, the contempt. Slowly, Noah pressed record. "On the ground," Whitman shouted. "Now!" Marcus's chest rose and fell, once. This was the moment. He knew it instantly. He could disarm Whitman. He could do it faster than the officer could react. Muscle memory burned beneath his skin, eager, precise, and he knew exactly how that story would end. A black man attacking a cop, a gun discharged, headlines written before the body hit the ground. Marcus lowered himself carefully, one knee touching the hot pavement. "I am complying," he said clearly, his voice carrying. "I am not resisting." Whitman surged forward, shoving him down the rest of the way. The concrete scraped through the fabric of Marcus's uniform as both knees hit the ground. Heat bled through the cloth. "Hands behind your head!" Marcus obeyed. Whitman drove a knee into his back, hard, forcing the breath from his lungs. Cuffs snapped around his wrists, biting tight. Around them, the world held its breath. Noah's hands shook, but he kept filming. Lena reached for her phone, heart pounding. Marcus stared at the pavement inches from his face. He thought of the desert overseas, the respect between soldiers who knew the cost of power, and he realized, with quiet clarity, that the most dangerous battlefield he had ever stepped onto was right here, unmarked, familiar, and convinced it was righteous. This was the wrong stop, and it had only just begun. The Redwood Falls police station sat a few miles off Route 117, a low brick building dulled by sun and time. The late afternoon heat followed the cruiser inside when the doors opened, carrying dust and the faint smell of gasoline. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale, unforgiving glow across scuffed floors and chipped desks. The town outside moved slowly. Inside, everything tightened. Marcus Reynolds was brought in through the front, not the back. Clay Whitman kept one hand on Marcus's shoulder, guiding him with performative firmness, as if an audience still watched. The cuffs were tight, too tight, but Marcus said nothing. His posture remained straight, his breathing steady. He had learned long ago that silence, when chosen deliberately, could be louder than any protest. At the desk stood Sergeant Paul Kramer. Kramer was in his early 50s, tall but stooped, with a square face marked by old lines that came from decades of night shifts and paperwork rather than the street. His hair was thinning and gray, combed carefully, and his uniform was immaculate in a way that suggested pride rather than vanity. He had served in the Army as a mechanic years earlier and carried a quiet respect for things that were earned. When he looked up and saw Marcus's uniform, something in his expression changed. Not alarm, not fear, but recognition. "What's this?" Kramer asked, voice even. "Stolen valor," Whitman said quickly. Guy was acting suspicious. "Fancy car, fake uniform. Wouldn't comply." Marcus met Kramer's eyes. "Commander Marcus Reynolds, United States Navy," he said calmly. "I complied fully. I request my identification be checked." Kramer didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to the medals, the stitching, the spacing. He stepped closer, not to challenge, but to look. The room felt suddenly smaller. "Clay," Kramer said, "did you check his ID at the scene?" Whitman shifted. He kept reaching for his jacket. I wasn't taking chances. Kramer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Bring me the wallet." Whitman hesitated, then reached into Marcus's jacket and produced a slim black case. Inside was a common access card, edges worn smooth from years of use. Kramer took it gently, like an object that demanded care. "Uncuff him," Kramer said. Whitman scoffed. "Sarge?" "Not yet," Kramer corrected. "Stand by." Kramer slid the card into the reader at his desk. The screen blinked. A progress bar crawled forward. The hum of the station seemed to grow louder, filling the silence. Then the text appeared. "Active duty. Naval Special Warfare. Top secret clearance." Kramer stared at the screen. He read it again. Then he looked at Marcus. Then at Whitman. "Remove the cuffs," he said, louder now. Whitman's face drained of color. His gums stopped moving. "Sarge, this has to be some kind of—" "Now!" Keys rattled. The cuffs came off. Red marks circled Marcus's wrists. He flexed his hands once, slowly, then clasped them in front of him. "I need a secure line," Marcus said. "I am requesting contact with JAG." Kramer nodded immediately. "You'll have it." Across the room, a young officer had frozen near the filing cabinets. Aaron Cole was 24, tall and lean with a nervous posture that hadn't yet hardened into bravado. His uniform was still stiff from the factory, creases sharp, boots polished too carefully. He had joined the force believing in rules, believing that structure could be fair. Watching the screen light up had sent a chill through him. He glanced at Whitman, then back at Marcus, doubt settling in his chest like a weight. Kramer escorted Marcus to a small office off the main floor. Inside, the air was cooler, quieter. He handed Marcus the phone. "I'm sorry for this," Kramer said, not defensively, but with the tired sincerity of someone who knew better. "We'll get this straightened out." Marcus dialed from memory. The number was one few civilians ever knew. "Judge Advocate General," a crisp voice answered. "This is Commander Marcus Reynolds," Marcus said. "I have been unlawfully detained by local law enforcement in Redwood Falls, New Mexico. I am requesting immediate legal oversight." There was a pause, brief, deliberate. "Stand by, Commander." Kramer stepped back, closing the door gently. Outside, the station buzzed with whispered confusion. Whitman had retreated to the corner near the lockers. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone. He dialed quickly, pacing. "Yeah, it's me," he hissed. "Listen, I need advice. Now. This thing is getting blown out of proportion." On the other end was the police union representative, a voice that sounded practiced and detached. Whitman spoke fast, skipping details, framing himself as the victim of misunderstanding. "You need to calm down," the voice said. "Don't say anything else. We'll handle it." Whitman hung up, sweat beading at his temples. Outside the station, the sun dipped lower. In the parking lot, Lena Ortiz sat in her car, laptop balanced on her knees. She typed quickly, fingers flying, eyes sharp with focus. She replayed the clip Noah had sent her, hands raised, a gun drawn, the voice shouting orders. She titled the piece carefully, aware of the weight of every word. Decorated Navy officer detained at local gas station. Questions mount in Redwood Falls. She hit publish. Within minutes, notifications began to stack. Shares, comments, anger, confusion. Across town, Noah Bennett sat on the edge of his bed, phone buzzing nonstop. His heart raced. He hadn't planned on becoming part of anything. He had just seen something wrong and refused to look away. Watching the video spread made his stomach twist with fear and resolve in equal measure. Back at the station, Kramer's phone rang. He listened, his expression tightening with each sentence. "Yes," he said finally. "Understood." He hung up and turned to Whitman. "You're off the floor. Go to my office." Whitman opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. In the small office, Marcus ended his call and set the phone down. "They're aware," he said simply. Kramer nodded. "We'll cooperate fully." Marcus stood, adjusting his uniform with practiced precision. He felt the familiar steadiness return, not the adrenaline of combat, but the clarity that came with purpose. Outside the closed door, Aaron Cole leaned against the wall, breathing shallowly. He looked down at his hands and realized they were trembling, not with fear, but with something closer to anger, the kind that came from watching a line being crossed. The system had shifted. Everyone in the building could feel it, and it had started with a single scan. 3 weeks later, the heat had settled into Redwood Falls like a permanent resident. The days stretched long and brittle, the nights offering little relief. Dust gathered along curbs and storefronts, unmoved by the rare breeze. The town looked unchanged on the surface, but beneath it, conversations had shifted. Eyes lingered longer and names were spoken more carefully. Marcus Reynolds sat in a quiet law office 2 blocks from the courthouse, his posture straight despite the soft leather chair. He wore civilian clothes now, dark slacks, a simple button-down, sleeves rolled to the forearms. Without the uniform, he looked less ceremonial but no less composed. The red marks on his wrists had faded, though the memory had not. Across the desk sat Daniel Brooks, a civil rights attorney in his late 50s. Brooks was tall and narrow-shouldered, with silver hair kept short and a neatly trimmed beard that framed a face sharpened by decades of argument. He dressed conservatively, gray suit, muted tie, but his eyes carried an alert, restless intelligence. He spoke slowly, choosing words with care, a habit formed from years of watching powerful people try to talk their way out of accountability. "They're offering $300,000, Brooks said, sliding a folder across the desk. "And a non-disclosure agreement, ironclad. You sign, the city apologizes quietly, and this disappears." Marcus didn't touch the folder. He looked past it through the window where pedestrians moved under the sun, unaware of how close their town had come to something uglier. "This isn't compensation," Marcus said. "It's hush money." Brooks nodded. "They're afraid. Not of you, of what this leads to." Marcus finally glanced down at the papers. The number meant nothing to him. Money had never been the currency that decided right from wrong. "If I take this," he said, "they learn nothing." "And if you don't," Brooks replied, "they'll fight. Harder than you think." "Then we fight," Marcus said simply. Brooks studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I figured you'd say that." Across town, Noah Bennett lay motionless in a hospital room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and recycled air. He was 21, his thin frame dwarfed by the bed, dark curls flattened against a pillow. A web of bruises marked the side of his face, partially hidden by gauze. The monitors hummed steadily, indifferent to the injustice that had put him there. Noah's mother, Ellen Bennett, sat beside him. She was a small woman with tired eyes and graying hair pulled into a loose bun. She held his hand gently, as if afraid that too much pressure might break something fragile. Ellen had raised Noah alone after his father died in a construction accident years earlier. Since then, she had learned how to wait, at hospitals, at courtrooms, at places where answers never came quickly. The doctors had said Noah might wake soon. They had also said there were no guarantees. At the police station, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to denial. Clay Whitman was back on duty, his suspension reduced to desk work pending internal review. He wore the same uniform, the same badge, but something in his posture had changed. The swagger had dulled, replaced by irritation edged with fear. In the evidence room, Aaron Cole stood alone, the hum of the ventilation system loud in the silence. Aaron's hands moved carefully as he slid a small memory card into his pocket. He was sweating, not from heat, but from the weight of the decision he had made. Over the past 2 weeks, Aaron had stayed late, volunteering for inventory shifts no one else wanted. He had told himself he was just being thorough. In truth, he had been looking for something to confirm what his instincts already knew. The dashcam footage told a story no report ever would. Stop after stop, out-of-state plates, minor infractions escalated into searches, property seized, charges dropped quietly when paperwork was signed. Aaron watched Whitman's face on the recordings. Calm, confident, practiced. This wasn't a mistake. It was a system. Aaron copied everything. He didn't know yet what he would do with it. He only knew he couldn't pretend he hadn't seen it. At the Herald office, Lena Ortiz leaned over her desk, surrounded by printed records and open tabs. Her hair was pulled back tighter than usual, dark circles under her eyes from nights spent chasing leads. She sipped cold coffee and scrolled through county reports, her jaw tightening with each line. Asset forfeiture. The term looked harmless enough on paper. Legal, procedural. But the numbers told another story. Cars seized without charges. Cash held indefinitely. Property never returned. Redwood Falls had quietly become one of the most aggressive forfeiture towns in the region. Lena traced patterns, names, officers. Whitman's appeared more often than anyone else's. She began drafting her next piece, careful not to speculate, only to present facts. Facts had a way of doing the damage themselves. Back in Brooks's office, the door opened quietly. Sarah Reynolds stepped in, her presence shifting the room in a way Marcus felt more than saw. Sarah was 40, tall and slender with warm brown skin and a calm grace that came from resilience rather than ease. Her hair fell in loose curls around her shoulders, streaked faintly with gray she refused to dye. Her eyes were steady, observant, shaped by years of waiting through deployments and funerals. She had once been more openly gentle. Losing friends to war, and nearly losing Marcus to it, had taught her how to be strong without becoming hard. She rested a hand on Marcus's shoulder. How did it go? He didn't look up. They tried to buy silence. Sarah exhaled slowly. And? We're not for sale. She nodded, unsurprised. Then we tell the truth. Outside, the city prosecutor's office buzzed with quiet urgency. Thomas Hale, the local district attorney, paced behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear. Hale was in his early 60s, heavy-set, with thinning hair and a face that had grown careful over time. He had built his career on balance, keeping peace, keeping allies, avoiding fights that couldn't be won. "This doesn't need to be a spectacle," Hale said into the phone. "We can downgrade. Excessive force becomes procedural misconduct, internal discipline." On the other end, the voice was skeptical. Hale sighed. He knew Whitman was a liability. He also knew exposing the truth would pull too many threads. Some systems survived only because no one looked too closely. At the hospital, Noah stirred. It was subtle. A tightening of fingers, a shallow breath taken differently. Ellen leaned forward, heart racing. Noah. His eyes fluttered, unfocused but open. Back in the law office, Brooks closed the folder and set it aside. "They'll push harder now," he said. "Pressure from every angle." Marcus stood, straightening his shirt. "Then we stand." Outside, Redwood Falls went on with its evening routines. Lights flicked on. Cars passed. Somewhere between the courthouse, the hospital, the newsroom, and the police station, a line had been crossed, and no amount of money could redraw it. Night settled hard over the desert outside Redwood Falls. The heat did not disappear after sunset. It simply changed character, becoming heavier, more intimate, pressing against skin and breath alike. The land around Red Rock storage stretched flat and unforgiving, a scatter of rust-colored dirt, scrub brush, and chain-link fences humming faintly in the dark wind. From the road, the storage facility looked like nothing. Rows of identical metal doors, silent and anonymous. The kind of place people trusted precisely because it seemed unimportant. That trust had been misplaced. Marcus Reynolds stood a short distance away, partially concealed behind a low ridge of dirt and rock. He wore dark civilian clothes, practical and unremarkable, his posture relaxed but alert. Even without a weapon in his hands, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone used to command. The night breeze brushed his face, bringing with it the faint smell of oil and dust. His eyes never stopped moving. Beside him stood Special Agent Karen Whitlock, FBI. Whitlock was in her early 40s, medium height, athletic build, with cropped blonde hair and sharp, intelligent features. Her face showed little emotion, but her eyes missed nothing. Years in financial crimes and public corruption had taught her patience. She trusted evidence more than instincts, but she respected both. Above them, nearly invisible against the dark sky, a small surveillance drone hovered. Its camera fed a live stream to a van parked farther down the road, where two agents monitored movement near the storage units. Marcus folded his arms loosely. "This is where he keeps it," he said. Whitlock nodded. "Unit 17B, Red Rock Storage." Aaron was specific. Across the way, Aaron Cole sat inside the van, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. He had changed out of his uniform, now wearing jeans and a plain gray hoodie, the hood pulled low. Without the badge, he looked younger, almost fragile, but his eyes carried a resolve that hadn't been there a month earlier. Aaron had given his statement 2 days ago. The moment he had spoken the words aloud, I copied the dashcam footage, his life had divided cleanly into before and after. The FBI had moved, quickly, quietly. Protective custody was arranged. His phone had been replaced, his name removed from internal rosters. He was no longer just a rookie officer. He was a whistleblower, and he was terrified. "They'll come," Aaron said quietly, staring at the screen. "He won't let it go." Whitlock glanced back at him. "You did the right thing." Aaron didn't answer. Right things had consequences. Inside the storage facility, headlights appeared at the gate. A familiar cruiser rolled in slow and cautious, engine idling low. Clay Whitman sat behind the wheel, jaw clenched, eyes darting. He had changed into plain clothes. Dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low, but his movements were rigid, betraying panic beneath the attempt at control. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt despite the night air. Whitman had known something was wrong the moment the union stopped returning his calls. He parked near Unit 17B, killed the engine, and sat still for a long second listening. The desert offered no reassurance. Silence here felt like exposure. He stepped out, unlocked the unit, and slid the metal door upward. Inside was his kingdom. Stacks of plastic bins lined the walls, each carefully labeled. Cash bundled with rubber bands. Jewelry sealed in evidence bags that had never reached evidence rooms. Firearms wrapped in cloth. Electronics. Documents. Property taken from people who would never know where it had gone. Or why. Whitman moved fast now, grabbing a red gas can from the corner. His breathing grew shallow. "I can fix this," he muttered. "Just burn it." He splashed gasoline across the nearest bins, the smell sharp and immediate. In the van, the agents leaned forward. Whitlock lifted her radio. "All units, stand by." Marcus watched Whitman through the drone feed. He felt no triumph, only a heavy, settled clarity. This was not revenge. This was exposure. Whitman reached for a lighter. The floodlights exploded on. Brilliant white light washed over the storage yard, turning night into harsh daylight. Shadows vanished. The world narrowed. "Clay Whitman!" a voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Federal agents! Drop the lighter and show us your hands!" Whitman froze. The lighter slipped from his fingers and hit the dirt. He turned slowly, blinking against the glare, hands trembling. For a moment, instinct took over. His right hand twitched toward his waistband. "Don't," another voice called out. Quieter, closer. Aaron's. Whitman's eyes locked onto the van. Recognition flickered, followed by betrayal, then resignation. He dropped to his knees. Agents moved in swiftly, weapons trained, boots crunching against gravel. Whitman was cuffed without ceremony, pulled away from the gas-soaked evidence. Marcus stepped forward as the agents secured the scene. He did not speak to Whitman. He didn't need to. Inside Unit 17B, the scope of the damage revealed itself fully. One agent opened a small black pouch. Inside lay a smartphone. Screen cracked, battery nearly dead. Aaron leaned closer. "That's Noah's," he said softly. "He had it on him." The phone was powered on. The last video played. Whitman's voice filled the unit, harsh and contemptuous. Noah's shaky breathing. A racial slur. The sound of a blow. The video ended abruptly. Marcus closed his eyes once. This was the proof. Not just of corruption, but of cruelty. Outside, Whitman sat slumped between two agents, staring at the ground. The badge he had once polished so proudly lay discarded on the hood of a vehicle. Whitlock turned to Aaron. "You're officially under federal protection," she said. "There's no going back." Aaron nodded, swallowing hard. "I know." Marcus looked at the rows of stolen lives boxed and labeled, and felt the weight of every silent choice that had allowed this to exist. The storage unit door was sealed. Red Rock Storage, Unit 17B, had given up its secrets. And with them, the last illusion that this had ever been just a mistake. 6 months after Red Rock Storage Unit 17B was sealed, winter arrived in Redwood Falls without ceremony. The desert mornings turned brittle, frost clinging to windshields and courthouse steps alike. By the time the federal trial began, the town had learned to speak in lowered voices. Storefronts still opened. Schools still rang bells. But everyone knew where the center of gravity had moved. The United States District Court rose pale and square against the sky, a building designed to look neutral, as if justice itself preferred anonymity. Inside, the air carried the faint smell of polished wood and paper that had passed through too many hands. Security lines stretched down the hallway. Reporters clustered near outlets, cords and cameras snaking across the floor. Marcus Reynolds arrived early. He wore a charcoal suit, no uniform, no medals. The cut was simple, precise. Chosen by someone who did not want attention, yet accepted it would come. His posture remained straight, shoulders set, his face composed. If the months had taken anything from him, it was not visible. Beside him walked Sarah Reynolds, steady and unhurried. She wore a dark blue coat and low heels, her hair pulled back in a loose twist. Sarah moved with quiet confidence, greeting people with brief nods rather than smiles. Years of wading through uncertainty had taught her how to conserve emotion without becoming distant. In the gallery, Noah Bennett sat with his mother. Noah looked thinner than before, his face paler, but his eyes were clear and focused. The scars along his temple were faint now, reminders rather than wounds. He wore a simple sweater and held a folded piece of paper in his hands, notes he had written and rewritten, not because he needed them, but because holding something steady calmed him. Helen Bennett sat close, her hand resting lightly on his arm, as if reminding him he was real, awake, present. Across the aisle, Lena Ortiz adjusted her recorder. She had cut her hair shorter since the storage raid, a practical choice after months of relentless deadlines. The fatigue was there, but so was something else. Satisfaction, earned slowly. She had not chased headlines. She had followed facts. At the defense table sat Clay Whitman. The man who had once filled a uniform with swagger now appeared smaller. His shoulders slumped beneath a borrowed suit that did not fit well. His hair had thinned noticeably, his jaw tight, eyes darting whenever someone shifted in their seat. The badge that had once defined him was gone. In its place sat a quiet, gnawing fear. The judge entered. Judge Miriam Caldwell, mid-60s, silver hair cut cleanly at the jaw, eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. She had built her reputation on patience and precision, listening longer than most, tolerating less than anyone expected. When she took her seat, the room settled. The prosecution opened with evidence, not rhetoric. The first witness was Aaron Cole. He walked to the stand carefully, wearing a plain suit, his expression controlled. He described the dashcam system, how footage was stored, how it could be altered, and how he had preserved the originals. His voice did not waver as the videos played. Stops, searches, seizures, patterns that no longer required interpretation. Then the screens shifted. Noah's video filled the courtroom. The sound was uneven, the image shaky, but the meaning was unmistakable. The slur, the blow, the fall. Noah watched without looking away. His mother closed her eyes. When it was Noah's turn, he stood slowly, feeling every gaze settle on him. He spoke clearly, describing the night he had seen Whitman before, how he had recognized the tone, the posture, the anger that didn't need provocation. He explained what it felt like to realize too late that witnessing injustice could make you a target. He did not cry. He did not dramatize. He told the truth and let it stand. Marcus took the stand on the third day. The oath was administered. He placed his hand on the Bible without ceremony. The prosecutor asked him to describe the stop. Marcus did so calmly, without embellishment. The gun, the commands, the decision. "Commander Reynolds," the prosecutor said, "you are trained in close-quarters combat. Why did you not resist?" Marcus paused. He looked briefly toward the jury, then back to the bench. "Because resistance would have made me dead," he said, "and it would have made him right." The room was silent. "If I had moved," Marcus continued, "the story would have ended before it began. A black man attacking an officer. A justified shooting. I chose to survive long enough for the truth to speak for itself." The defense attempted to rattle him, suggested misunderstandings, stress, split-second decisions. Marcus answered each question evenly. He did not raise his voice, he did not argue. By the end, there was nothing left to say. Outside the courtroom, the ripple effect continued. Several officers from Redwood Falls had already entered plea agreements. They appeared briefly on dockets, names read aloud, heads bowed. Their testimonies pointed upward, outward. Systems did not collapse all at once. They unraveled thread by thread. The local district attorney, Thomas Hale, was not present. An investigation had begun into his office, quiet but thorough. Subpoenas moved without press releases. Files changed hands. On the final day, Judge Caldwell read the verdict. Guilty on racketeering. Guilty on deprivation of civil rights. Guilty on aggravated assault resulting in severe injury. Whitman's hands trembled as the words landed. Sentencing followed. 20 years, the judge said, for racketeering. 10 years for the civil rights violations. 30 years for the assault that had nearly taken a life. 60 years total, she concluded, to be served consecutively. Whitman's knees buckled. He was guided back into his chair, staring ahead as if the room had dissolved. The gavel struck once. Outside, the cold air cut clean and sharp. Reporters surged forward, questions overlapping. Lena stepped aside, watching as Marcus and Sarah emerged together. She did not raise her microphone. Some moments did not need capturing. Later that evening, the Regional Press Association announced its annual awards. Lena Ortiz's series on asset forfeiture and public corruption in Redwood Falls received top honors. She read the email twice, then closed her laptop and went for a long walk, letting the town breathe around her. In the hospital, Ellen Bennett slept for the first time without the fear that had haunted her nights. Noah stared at the ceiling, replaying the judge's words, feeling something like release settle into his chest. Redwood Falls did not celebrate. It exhaled. Justice, once distant and abstract, had finally taken shape. The federal transport bus rolled through the gates just before dawn, its tires crunching over gravel that had never known mercy. The prison rose out of the desert like a slab of poured shadow. Concrete walls bleached pale, razor wire glinting faintly under a sky stripped of color. The air smelled of disinfectant and dust. This was not a place that waited for redemption. Clay Whitman stepped down in shackles, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The uniform that had once given him shape and purpose was gone, replaced by a dull jumpsuit that fit no one well. He looked smaller than he ever had, the weight he'd lost carving hollows beneath his cheekbones. His hands shook, not with anger now, but with a quiet, exhausting fear. Inside, the intake officer barely glanced at his file before directing him toward protective housing. Former cops didn't survive long in general population. Whitman knew that. He didn't ask questions. His cell measured little more than a walk-in closet. A steel bed, a stainless sink, a narrow window too high to see through. The light never fully turned off. Isolation was not violent, it was patient. Hours passed without sound. Days blurred. Whitman replayed the same moments until they lost their edges. The stop at the gas station, the storage unit door rising, the floodlights. He had believed power would protect him. Now, it simply abandoned him. Miles away, Redwood Falls looked unchanged and entirely different at once. Marcus Reynolds stood on his front porch in the early morning, coffee cooling in his hand. He had filed his retirement paperwork the week after sentencing. The decision had not been sudden. It had been waiting, quietly since the night he knelt on hot pavement and chose restraint over survival by force. Without the uniform, Marcus looked lighter, not freer exactly, but more grounded. His shoulders still carried discipline. His eyes still measured distances. But there was space now for something else. Sarah Reynolds joined him, wrapping a light sweater tighter against the chill. She had always been tall and composed, her strength evident in the way she moved through rooms without asking permission. The months since the trial had changed her subtly, less guarded, more open with her warmth. She had spent years managing fear privately. Now, with the truth out in the open, she allowed herself to breathe. "They're meeting at the community hall tonight," she said. "They want you there." Marcus nodded. "I'll go." The meeting spilled out onto the sidewalk before it even began. Folding chairs filled the hall, and still people stood along the walls. Shop owners, teachers, parents. People Marcus had passed for years without knowing their names. They spoke in turns. Anger, gratitude, exhaustion threading their voices together. Someone said the word change, and the room went quiet. "You should run," a woman said finally, "for sheriff." Marcus hadn't planned on answering then, but the room waited, not demanding, simply hopeful. "I don't want power," he said. "I want accountability." "That's why," someone replied. The campaign that followed was not loud. No banners, no promises written to be forgotten. Marcus spoke plainly, repeating the same sentence until it stopped sounding like rhetoric and started sounding like policy. Power is a responsibility, not a prize. Sarah attended every event, steady at his side, listening more than speaking, her presence grounding the momentum that threatened to turn into spectacle. On election night, the results came in early. Marcus Reynolds won by a margin no one could spin. At the sheriff's office, Aaron Cole stood at a desk that had once belonged to someone else. He wore a new badge now, heavier than the last, not in weight but in meaning. The appointment had come quietly without ceremony. Deputy Sheriff, Internal Affairs. Aaron's posture had changed since the storage unit raid. He still moved carefully, but the nervousness had been replaced by focus. He asked difficult questions. He read every report twice. When someone bristled, he didn't flinch. "I won't protect people from consequences," he told Marcus on his first day. "I'll protect the truth." "That's the job," Marcus replied. Across town, the gates at Red Rock Storage were open for the first time in years. The metal doors had been removed, the interior scrubbed clean. What had once been a quiet warehouse of stolen lives now echoed with voices. The Red Rock Justice Center, the sign read. Legal clinics operated 3 days a week. Financial counselors sat with families who had never understood where their car or savings had gone. The space smelled of fresh paint and coffee. People lingered. On campus, Noah Bennett walked with a slight hitch that grew less noticeable by the week. His hair had grown longer, brushing his collar, and the scar at his temple had faded into a pale line, only visible in strong light. He had returned to classes with a purpose that surprised even him. Invitations arrived. Panels, assemblies, town halls. Noah learned how to speak without shaking, how to tell his story without reliving it. He spoke about attention, about the cost of seeing and the cost of silence. Students listened. At night, Ellen Bennett slept through the dark. It felt miraculous. Back at the prison, Whitman learned the rhythm of isolation. Meals slid through a slot. Recreation meant an hour alone in a fenced yard, eyes trained on the ground. He heard rumors through walls, names, sentences, but none involved him. The world had moved on without his consent. The realization was heavier than the door that closed each evening. In Redwood Falls, Marcus stood at the edge of the renovated storage center during a quiet afternoon, watching people come and go. Sarah stood beside him, hands in her coat pockets. "This place was built to hide things," she said softly. "It's better as a place to find them," Marcus replied. The desert wind moved through the open doors, carrying dust away. The morning of the oath arrived clear and cool, the desert sky washed clean by a wind that had blown through before dawn. Redwood Falls gathered early. Chairs were arranged on the courthouse steps, and the flag lifted itself slowly as if waking with the town. The building looked the same as it always had. Brick, square, familiar. But something in the way people stood suggested a change that could not be scrubbed away by time. Marcus Reynolds waited just inside the doors. He wore a tan sheriff's uniform tailored to fit him without excess, the gold star catching light when he moved. The uniform did not change his posture, it simply matched it. Years of discipline lived in his shoulders, but there was ease there now too, the kind that comes when a man accepts a burden willingly, rather than carrying it by default. His eyes were steady, not searching. Beside him stood Sarah Reynolds, composed as ever. She had chosen a simple dress in a muted color, her hair pinned back with the same practical grace she brought to everything. Sarah's strength had always been quiet, earned through long absences, hard phone calls, and nights spent listening for sounds that never came. She met people's eyes easily, offering a warmth that did not ask for attention. This morning, she looked proud without spectacle, as if pride were a private promise rather than a public display. When Marcus stepped outside, the crowd fell into a respectful hush. The clerk administered the oath, and Marcus repeated it without flourish. His voice carried, not because it was loud, but because it was certain. "Power is not a privilege," he said when it was his turn to speak. "It is a responsibility. It belongs to the people first. If you wear this badge, you carry their trust. If you break it, you answer for it." The words did not linger as slogans. They settled like ground rules. After the applause, Marcus shook hands until his wrist ached. Aaron Cole stood nearby, his new uniform crisp, his badge freshly pinned. He looked older than his years now, leaner, steadier. Aaron had taken to training with an intensity that bordered on obsession, not with tactics alone, but with judgment. He spoke plainly to recruits, insisting on transparency, on documentation, on the habit of asking one more question before making a decision. When he smiled, it was brief and sincere. Across the square, Lena Ortiz lingered with a notebook she no longer needed. She watched the faces, the posture of a town learning how to stand differently. Lena had written her final piece the night before, choosing her words carefully. Redwood falls, learns how to heal. It was not a victory lap. It was an accounting of harm named, of repair begun. She closed the notebook and let the moment pass unrecorded. By mid-afternoon, the courthouse steps emptied. Marcus drove alone. The road to Desert Star Fuel had not changed. Same asphalt, same pale dust drifting across the shoulders. The station stood quiet, a bell above the door chiming once as he stepped out. The smell of gasoline was faint, almost gentle in the open air. He stood by the pump for a moment, hands at his sides, letting memory pass through without resistance. The pavement where he had knelt was clean now. Sunlight warmed it evenly. No cameras, no raised voices. A pickup rolled in and out without incident. The desert did what it always did. It moved on. Marcus nodded once, then returned to his truck. At the federal facility hours away, a request slid across a metal desk. Clay Whitman had filled out the form with shaking hands, the lines crooked where the pen had pressed too hard. He asked for a transfer. He cited isolation, mental distress, the unrelenting quiet. The request made its way through channels efficiently, stamped and logged. When the call came to the sheriff's office, Marcus took it privately. The voice on the other end explained the request without commentary. "No," Marcus said after a pause. His tone was even, not punitive. "He remains where he is." There was no satisfaction in the refusal, only consistency. Back in town, the doors of the Noah Bennett Justice Center opened for the first time. The building had once been anonymous. Now it breathed. Families lined up for legal advice. Volunteers poured coffee. A mural along the outer wall depicted a pair of open hands, painted by local students. Noah Bennett stood near the entrance, taller than he had been months earlier, his stride confident. He wore a simple jacket and spoke with a measured calm to anyone who asked why he was there. "I didn't plan to be," he said more than once. "I just didn't look away." His mother watched from a few steps back, eyes bright, shoulders finally unburdened. In the training room at the sheriff's office, Aaron addressed a group of new deputies. He demonstrated procedures, yes, but he lingered on judgment, on the pause before action, on documentation as protection for everyone involved. He told them stories without names, lessons without lectures. When a young deputy asked what to do when pressure came from above, Aaron answered without hesitation. "You write it down," he said, "and you keep writing." As evening settled, Marcus drove the perimeter of Redwood Falls. Streetlights flickered on. The town looked ordinary, which felt like a triumph. He passed the Justice Center, the school, the station. He waved at a store owner who waved back. At home, Sarah had opened the windows. The desert air moved through the rooms. carrying the sound of crickets and distant traffic. She set 2 glasses on the table and waited. When Marcus arrived, they sat without rushing. The day had been long, but it had closed cleanly. Later, Marcus took the long way back through town. The road curved gently, the lights thinning as houses gave way to open land. He drove with both hands on the wheel, not because he needed to, but because it felt right. Redwood Falls receded in the rearview mirror, not as a place escaped, but as one entrusted. The circle closed without ceremony. That, Marcus thought, was the point. This story is not about uniforms, titles, or power. It is about choice. In everyday life, most injustice does not begin with cruelty. It begins with silence, with looking away, with telling ourselves that it is not our problem, not our moment, not our responsibility. Marcus chose restraint over revenge. Noah chose to record instead of turning his head. Aaron chose truth over comfort. None of them were perfect heroes. They were ordinary people who decided not to betray their own conscience. The lesson is simple, but not easy. Power must always be questioned. Authority must always be accountable. And dignity must never depend on skin color, status, or silence. In our daily lives, we may never face a courtroom or a badge, but we face moments where speaking up matters. How we treat strangers, how we respond to unfairness, whether we protect the vulnerable or protect our convenience. This story reminds us that real strength is not found in domination, but in responsibility. Justice does not arrive by accident. It is built by people who are willing to look guilty, uncomfortable, or alone for the sake of what is right. If this story moved you, let it move you beyond the screen. Be kinder. Be braver. Ask questions. Teach the next generation that power is a duty, not a reward. Share this story with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment about what part touched you the most. Tell us where you are watching from today. Subscribe to the channel if you believe stories like this matter. May God bless you, protect your family, and give you the courage to stand for truth when it is hardest. If you believe in justice, if you believe in mercy, and if you believe that light is stronger than fear, comment Amen.